Hello, welcome back to my world of stuff. Yes, it's time to resurrect the retro movie review. This is a series of videos I did last year looking at some classic genre films. And as the year wore on, the series sort of came to a close. I tried to resurrect it in October last year with my Halloween season, but within 2 or 3 videos, it was becoming apparent that nobody was very interested, so I dropped that series. And I didn't particularly intend to do this video today. It wasn't on my radar as something to do. I'll tell you in a moment or two how this actually came about. But before that, if you like watching this sort of stuff with a bloke who's old enough to know better, talking about films, TV, books, comics, physical media and all that sort of caper, then why not press the subscribe button, which is somewhere around here. And you can also like it, and you can leave a comment, and you can share it with your chums. That will be a very, very nice thing to do. A little bit of housekeeping, 1 or 2 things I want to mention before I crack on with the film review. I wanted to mention a fellow YouTuber who has very kindly left a link to my channel in his most recent video. His name is Terry Cooper. His YouTube channel is called Terry on Tuesday because he posts videos every Tuesday, very sensibly. Terry I've known for a while. He is somebody I met when I was doing some filming several years ago in my one of my lives as a supporting artist. Terry is jack of all trades and probably master of most of them. He's sort of an actor, writer, director, musician, prop builder. A lot of his videos are to do with building sort of props of science fiction costumes and things. He more recently did a costume of Marvin the android from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. He's currently doing something from Andor, but I haven't watched Andor. I don't know what it is he's building, but it looks very nice. He used to be a Jack Sparrow impersonator as well. Had all the costume and all the bits and pieces. Looked rather good. So anyway, Terry has got his own YouTube channel, which is this. So why not go and like it and subscribe it? I'm sure he'd appreciate it. And he's very kindly mentioned this channel in his most recent video, where for a change he did something apparently inspired by me on the physical media videos that I do, picking up odds and sods from charity shops and so on. And he very kindly gave me a shout out. Terry, as I say, is a filmmaker. He's got a film called Off-World, science fiction feature, which I think is has been in production for quite some time, in post-production, but I believe there's now an edit of it available, which I can look at. He sent me a link, and I shall be looking at that shortly and reviewing it shortly, and giving you some details, hopefully, on when you will be able to see it if you're interested in such things. He's got a new film, Bloody Students, which is filming later in the year, and I was quite intrigued in this video, and he said he might have a role for me in it. Which is very good, because I'm always interested in that sort of thing. So anyway, check out Terry on Tuesday, and thanks for the mention, Terry. Much appreciated. Now, back to this particular retro movie review. This isn't a film I'd intended to watch, this isn't a video I'd intended to do, but on the weekend, I don't know, you probably have the same sort of thing now and again. If you have lots of physical media... Sorry, the cat's at the door. If you have lots of... Come on then, you stupid animal. Hang on, I'll be back now. Right, thank you, I have returned, and so has she. Yeah, I haven't been up in the cinema room for a while properly because of the winter, and there's been a few issues, structural issues, which are being addressed at the moment. And because I haven't been up yet, Rosie hasn't been up yet, and hence she's forgotten how to use the cat flap. So I just noticed she was sitting up there looking forlornly in, wondering, why can't I go in there? She's now in there, and she's faffing about again. Anyway, back to this particular video. As I mentioned, perhaps like me, you sometimes sit at home thinking, what the hell am I going to watch tonight? And I've got obviously lots of Blu-rays, I've got lots of 4Ks, I've got DVDs, I've got access to God knows how many streaming sites, Amazon, Netflix, Disney, Paramount, Now. But even with all that, you sometimes think, what do I fancy watching tonight? I don't know what I fancy watching. And Saturday night, I was just in the mood to watch something slightly classic, if you like. So I just flicked through Amazon and I came across this particular film, The House That Dripped Blood. This is one of the Amicus portmanteau horror films that were very popular in the 60s and 70s. Films which basically are a selection of short horror stories with a linking sort of framework around them. Very popular with, for example, The League of Gentlemen, who were very inspired by that style of filmmaking in their TV shows and projects that they've done since they first appeared. I have a fondness for these sorts of films. I remember watching them all back in the day. They were probably, again, part of my genre education back in the 70s when the BBC used to show these double bills of science fiction and horror films. and I was very luckily allowed to stay up to watch them. And The House of Drip Blood, when it came up, The House of Drip Blood came up on the Amazon sort of choice, and I thought, do I remember watching that one? It's one of those titles that you sort of think, yeah, I know this film well. But when I looked at the précis, the storyline, I thought, yeah, it's familiar, but not familiar enough for me to say I know it very well. So I decided to take a look. And it's great fun. I mean, it's 1971. It was directed by Peter Cushing. The script was co-written by Robert Bloch, who of course famously created Psycho back in the 60s. And it takes the shape of 4 short vignettes, short little horror stories, based around the concept of a mysterious house whose occupants are variously plagued by strange supernatural happenings and terrible things. And the owners of these houses generally meet terrible fates. By modern standards, this is an incredibly bloodless affair, considering it's called The House That Dripped Blood. I think there's precious little of the red stuff on display. The story basically is John Bennett, great British character actor of the 60s and 70s. He plays a detective who's been sent down to explore this house where there have been a lot of mysterious deaths. He's speaking to estate agents and a local police officer who give him all those stories of something strange going on there. And we flash back to these 4 separate stories which take us to the house at various points in his life. So presumably in terms of filmmaking, it was fairly cheap for them to make because they built the set and just rolled all the stories into it. The first story features Denholm Elliott as a slightly hacky sort of horror writer who's travelled to stay in the house for a while he finishes off his latest horror book. While he's there, he creates a character called Dominic, sort of weird-looking psychopathic serial killer who stalks the countryside. And he becomes so obsessed with this character he's writing about that he sees him everywhere. He sees him when he's outside, he sees him in his home, and it starts to drive him a bit nuts. I'm not going to spoil any of these stories, by the way, because this is freely available on Amazon. You might choose to take a look at it. In the end, something terrible happens. It appears that Dominic has manifested himself and, well, things happen. It's an interesting story. It's quite fun. The twist ending is a bit sort of, yes, but where does this lead us now? There's sort of, you see the twist, think, oh, that's interesting. And then there's sort of a double twist that sort of makes you think, well, what was the point in the first twist if the second thing is happening? But it's good fun. As I say, it's quite creepy. It's quite well done. The house set is very good. I think the outside location was apparently a house in Shepperton Studios where the film was made. They used this building that was on the back lot. And the interior set is, as these things are very well designed, very well put together, and very atmospheric. I'm just looking at the cat, seeing what she's doing. But it's, it's sort of its time. It's 1971. It's that moment when horror was just coming out of the nursery, all the stuff that we'd had in the 60s with Hammer, which was sort of pushing at the boundaries. And this was just in between that and the slightly more permissive films that we had just a couple of years' time. The second story stars Peter Cushing, the legendary Peter Cushing, who plays a retired businessman who decides to go down to this house, rent out this house for a while. He wants to change the scene. He's in retirement. He wants to spend time gardening and listening to music and chilling out. And he's out and about one day and he sees this waxwork display, a waxwork building, museum. He goes into this museum, he sees all these artifacts and things, and one particular face that sort of strikes him and has quite an impact on him because it resembles an ex-love of his. He's visited by a friend of his. They both wander into this waxwork place, and it sort of exerts, this particular waxwork exerts strange and baleful influence over those who look at it, mainly because of the connection that they both seem to have. I think it's Joss Ackland plays his friend. Again, it's very well played. I mean, Peter Cushing, something about that man, they don't make him like him anymore. He's just a legend. He's so good. He elevated the material of everything he did by having that sort of gaunt physicality about him. It's just such a legend. Again, the ending is fairly predictable, but it's just well done. The stories are interesting. The scripts do enough to make you invest in the characters. And of course, it's great to see Peter Cushing. His old chum, Mr. Christopher Lee, is back in the next story, again set in the house, where he's the rather stern and patrician father of a young girl who doesn't seem to have any friends, she doesn't have toys, she doesn't have any connection with anything from the outside world because her father keeps her away from it. He hires the services of a nanny, played by Nairi Dawn Porter, and she's confused and puzzled about why Christopher Lee's character is so protective of his daughter, and she tries to introduce her into toys and just becoming a little bit more of a personality. The particular problem is giving her a doll, and that sends Christopher Lee into a complete fit. He throws the doll into a fire. As the story progresses, we discover that the girl isn't quite as innocent as she appears and has a strange influence over her father. Again, it's another good one. Again, there's not buckets of torrents of blood flying everywhere, but it's an entertaining little story. Again, Christopher Lee has got that sort of look about him, that stature that makes him such an icon, one of those actors that we miss so much these days. The fourth and final story is the closest the film comes to a comedy. I was reading up on the film after I watched it, and apparently a lot of it was originally filmed slightly tongue-in-cheek, and I believe that the producers came along and saw what was happening and were not very happy, so the tone of some of the stories was amended. But I think the fourth story is the closest that we get here to a comedy, and there's lots of interesting things to say about this one. This final story stars Jon Pertwee as a washed-up horror actor. Well, he's not washed up, but he's just makes a succession of rather lurid, cheap horror films. He's obviously seen better days, and he's worked with some of the classic actors of the time, but he's now reduced to making these rather cheap, lurid horror films. He's playing a vampire in his latest film. What's interesting about this, before talking about the story itself, is that this was made in late summer of 1971. Of course, by this time, 1970 in fact, I think it was 1970, it was released in 71. By this time, Jon Pertwee had already done one season as Doctor Who. He still has that, obviously has that look about him, his hair isn't as bouffant as it became later in Doctor Who. And his portrayal, there's bits of Doctor Who in some of the ways that he says his dialogue. What's particularly noticeable is the costume that he wears, because in playing this vampiric character, he actually dresses up in the frilly shirts and cuffs, black jacket, and later on a red-lined cloak, just like his version of the Doctor. So it must have been a bit like a busman's holiday for him making this film. He stepped off the set of Doctor Who to do a horror film and finds himself wearing pretty much the same costume. Just an observation. Also interesting that in the cast of this particular episode, a couple of actors he'd later go on to work with in Doctor Who. Roy Evans, the Welsh actor who appeared in The Green Death, although I'm not sure if he shared any scenes with Jon Pertwee, and Ingrid Pitt, who went on to appear the following year in one of Pertwee's lesser serials, The Time Monster. Anyway, that's all by and by. Those are just little observations, really, about Jon Pertwee's presence. Anyway, he plays this actor, he's making this film, he's not very impressed or interested in it. He goes to an antique store, costumers, where a character played by the brilliant Geoffrey Bayldon, who we know as Catweasel, of course, he sells him this red-line cloak. Pertwee's character, I can't remember the name of the actor he's playing now, he's very pleased to get this because it adds a bit of flair and colour to the character he's playing. He gets it for hardly any money at all, and he's told the shop is about to close down. He discovers, to cut a long story short, that when he puts the cloak on, he turns into a vampire, much to the chagrin of his co-star Ingrid Pitt. This is sort of a comedy one. I mean, it's not jokey, full of jokes, but it has a comedy tone to it. It's very much sort of wah-wah sort of comedy, especially at the end where things start to get a bit silly. One thing I particularly like is one line of dialogue, which is quite a knowing reference, where Jon Pertwee's character is talking about horror films. He said, "Oh, the horror films not like they were the old days. Frankenstein, the Mummy, Dracula, Lugosi, I mean, not that new fella," which is sort of a slight little reference to Christopher Lee, who's already been in the film. It's a fun little story. Again, there's not buckets of blood in it, but it's harmless entertainment. The framework comes to a close then with John Bennett as the detective coming to the house and finding that the stories of horrible things are true. It's good fun. It's just silly. It makes you realise how the horror genre's changed so much. Bearing in mind, this is an Amicus film, not horror, but they're all the same oeuvre, I feel like, the same style, the same feel, the same era of those sorts of films. It does make you realise how much things change, and as I've mentioned, horror changed massively a couple of years later with the likes of The Omen and particularly The Exorcist, which really raised the bar and was one of the Exorcist, I think, was one of the films that pushed Hammer out of business because they couldn't compete with that intensity. But these films are just nice because you get to see a really nice range of character actors who are no longer with us, really sort of hamming it up big time for the camera. In these clever little gothic stories, which are very throwaway, but just very entertaining themselves. They're not films you watch to see gore and blood and nudity. They're films that you watch because they're of their time, and they have that sort of... they just take you back to that particular time, that sort of nostalgia, if you like, for slightly simpler days of horror filmmaking. And I enjoyed it. I thought it was good fun, and I'm going to give it... only an 8 out of 10, because it's just, it's not sophisticated, it's not big and clever, because it was made in 1971, but it's really nicely done. I mean, the British film studios had a way of doing these things back in the day. They really knew how to rack up the atmosphere, and when you've got the likes of Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee, even in just one-shot stories, and of course John Pertwee, you can't go far wrong. So that's The House That Dripped Blood. If you're interested in watching it, it's available on Blu-ray, but it's also available on Amazon Prime, which is where I watched it on Saturday night. Right, thank you for watching this video. As I said, like and subscribe if you're at all interested. Press that subscribe button, like, thumbs up, leave a comment and share. Once again, thanks to Mr. Terry Cooper for the shout out. Once again, take a look and subscribe to his channel, and watch out for one of my next videos. Is probably going to be my review of his film Offworld. It's always difficult reviewing things written or made by friends or people you know, because you sort of automatically feel slightly hampered in what you can say. But I believe in being completely honest about things. I'm sure this isn't going to be a bad film. Obviously it's quite a low budget science fiction film, I believe, but I'm going to approach it that way. I'm not going to compare it to Star Wars or Marvel, because it's not going to be able to compare. But I'm just going to watch it as a creative enterprise done by local people, which is always to be commended. So that's coming up when I watch the film, which should hopefully be either later today or tomorrow. Right, thank you for watching. I'll go now because it's 17 minutes of me rambling. I'll see you soon. Until I do, keep taking the stuff.